So with that, I think it's worth thinking about when we look at customer success, what we consider. Sometimes, and I think the role is different in every single organization and every leader that I've spoken to, but in many cases there's a bit of a reactive kind of angle to it. So when we think of someone who's there for the customer in a flash, solves the problem, gets things done, that seems to be the default way that customer success is perceived. But if we conceive that to be great customer success, then we're actually looking at something that's already broken, needs to happen for customer success to be able to step in and shine. So a lot of the theme here is as well this nature of how much is reactive versus proactive. And I would also say how much space do we have to do that proactive value-added work that can make a real difference. I see some heads nodding, so that's, at least I'm on the right track. So yeah, I'll just pause with another question, which is, what is maybe the last save that your teams were praised for? And thinking about what kind of behavior is that actually rewarding? So I'd love to open it up and see if there's a couple of anecdotes from the room that you'd like to share.
We saved a recurring customer on an ops and support contract that was looking a little bit sketchy, and it was purely based on working out the value that they got from the previous 12 months and reminding them of that, and adding in a tiny bit of discount based on a longer term renewal. That stopped it from moving away.
That's actually a good example of good pieces where we're shifting from activity to a conversation around value,
Absolutely.
Which I think is really critical.
Just going back to what you were talking about in the last slide, that I got praised for it because it was an account that it wasn't mine, but I got given it, and it was very much, they were dead circling the drain because they've not used our product for 2 years. Just a bit of context, it was a very theme park orientated company that I was dealing with. So as you can imagine, they didn't have a fun time.
No.
And it was they didn't implement with us and then went through it and actually worked with them. Okay, why did you join with us all those years ago? Because it's the same person. What was the journey that you went on then? Is it still applicable? And actually we worked out yes it was. So we help you with our services, deal with all these good stuff. Why don't you just do it? You paid this money, hot committed money, we'll help you out of it because of that. And they did, and now they're a very large client. But to know what you said, in order for us to get that praise, they had to be in a bad place. Whereas actually, I found historically, you get a little bit of praise, but you don't get as much praise if you say, let's say it's a £1 million account, just that number, and you upsell that by 2%. That's a huge number. But you generally wouldn't get, you might get a little thing, company announcements, or I don't know however you go, but you would get more praise for the save, which is weird.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it is. I think it's a huge piece when we think about customer success, where there's been this angle of churn prevention, where it's that reactive, and actually, what you just described, where you're increasing by 2%, you're creating growth. It's not about being sales, so that's the thing. I know I have a commercial lens when I talk about customer success, but being commercial in a customer success role does not mean being sales. It actually means, for me, detecting opportunities in the value that we're delivering and potentially connecting the right people, depending on how your businesses work. Because I do think there should be a boundary between, am I delivering value or am I here to sell you the next thing? Because that muddies the water a little bit, but that doesn't exonerate customer success from identifying the growth opportunities. And also, if you're not rewarding that behavior, then how are you supposed to encourage that? And essentially, how do you build a value creation function rather than a defense line? I think it's a big piece here. Thank you for your feedback, it's really helpful. So this is what we've built, and I'll walk you through each of these different elements. I don't think any of this is new to any of you, and there's probably what you put in it is up for debate, but I suspect you'll recognize this. So I spent the last 10 years working, my customers were HR functions, and I've done HR tech, so I'm not an HR practitioner, but I spent a lot of time with people building competency models and looking at skill sets and things like that, and I just think it's nice to have a common frame to then discuss from different perspectives. So by all means, this is not the be all and end all, but it's a starting point to have a conversation, and maybe as well when you go back into your organizations and want to think about how you can elevate the function, how you maybe build a business case to enable that to happen. So essentially, you've got these kind of 4 key roles: the troubleshooter, and I'll walk you through what I mean by each one. The troubleshooter, then, and hopefully the names are fairly self-explanatory, the operator, then we have the strategic thinker, and the orchestrator. And essentially, the one in the middle is not a person. That's really important because it's really hard to, like, hiring a unicorn is pretty much impossible. So some people will naturally be better at some of these things than others. So when you're looking at this model, the idea is that you're building a team that is able to deliver this, and it may be that you have different types of people within that team who work together or complement each other. Because I would say the 2 roles that you see here are the more reactive ones, the operator and the troubleshooter, and the strategic thinker and orchestrator, those are your more proactive, judgment-based type of roles. And again, my lens on this is very high touch because it's for companies that are spending 6 to 7 figures a year. I'm very mindful that if you're dealing with smaller customers, you're much more likely to have more automation, probably not a dedicated customer success per account and things like that. So that's where I'd be interested, for those of you who are in a different environment, to give it a bit of a different lens. So yeah, troubleshooter, that's our emergency responder who's always there, on the ball, the minute something's not quite right. They're reactive, and actually, when there's something that goes severely wrong, these are the people who are going to pull out all the stops and some key magic to turn something around at the last minute. And so that's the point, I think, going back to what was said earlier. To have to turn something around, something has had to go wrong in the first place, right? So that's the challenge with it. It's like you react to what's in front of you as opposed to getting ahead of what the problem is. So yeah, any thoughts when you look at that one? I see some head nods. Does that look familiar? I'd say that's one of the most common profiles that we see in teams. And often because that's what's been hired for, to be honest. Our next one, this is the person who is super organized, who can follow a process down to a T, who makes sure that things run on time, that we've ticked all the boxes. So if we have specific metrics that we're following in order to validate the health of a customer, this person is on the ball, super organized, the QBR's on time, they've checked all the reporting, they're communicating back. But there's a challenge here, and this is where I know I've personally been burnt, my team members have been burnt, where you do all of this right and it still goes wrong. Because the risk was actually never in the systems that you were managing in the first place. And you can do the very best with what you can see in front of you, but if you don't see stuff, then it's very hard to react to it, right? So again, my hunches and what I've seen with my own teams when I was in these roles is, again, typically, particularly as you get to a more, I'd say, mid to senior level, very good operators, great in front of the customer, consistent. And that's important for the customer experience, right? But it leaves some gaps. So yeah, any thoughts?
I think sometimes we can be chasing them. You know, you might think, oh, this is a vanity metric because it's something that your company thinks is important, but it doesn't actually mean anything to the customer. So I think it's really important to understand what is actually important to them and what.
So true. That's a really good point you make there, because it's often, are we measuring the things that we can measure because they're in a system? Yeah. And it makes stuff look good on a sales kickoff when we say we've increased the adoption by 30%. But what does that mean for the impact on the customer? To your point, James, around value, and is the value in the number of users, or is the value in something that is impacting a bigger kind of organizational challenge that they're working with?
There's also like stealth metrics, like their budget could have changed.
Yes.
And you might not have visibility of that,
Yeah.
no matter how many times you ask them. You may not get visibility of that ever. And if they've got to slash their costs by 30%, you might just fall in that job.
That's exactly right. Again, I think hands up, definitely, that I've fallen into that and had to save stuff for my team over the years. That budget piece is key, which is where this role comes in. And I think this is probably one where, with a seniority, my guess is, and also if you have team members who have come from sales, they are likely to be slightly better at this, but it's not a guarantee. And that's what I mean about reading the business and not just the product. So it's exactly what you're talking about. They don't necessarily tell you about the budget, but are you able to see some signals? Now, it depends. If your customers are publicly listed businesses, you absolutely can if you have the skill set, because they're publishing quarterly reports. If it's a private company, much harder because obviously you don't have access to the numbers. So you kind of have to figure out, is there any news around that we can use to check if the initiative or the project that we're supporting is still top of mind, or has it suddenly just shifted away because there's been a change in leadership, for example. So those are the kind of external signals that don't sit in any of our kind of dashboards, but make a massive difference. There's been a kind of a forecast earnings haven't been hit, or there's a new senior leader coming in, and we often know, particularly, it's very political in these kind of businesses. So if a new CEO comes in, pretty much the old C-suite's going to go. They're going to bring all their buddies from their old company. They're going to do things. So it's a real shift. And if they decide that they want to do things differently, and you're not part of the difference, or you cannot pivot the way you talk about your value to align to what these new people are saying, then you're going to be in real trouble. And I think this is where the gap sits a lot, where we often end up not seeing the wood for the trees, is because we don't know how to, or we don't have the time to read the signals. I see something. How does that kind of show up in your teams? I'm just curious. Do you feel that they kind of like, is that something, a practice of going and reading external, more strategic news and insights? Is that something that's embedded in your process, or is it more ad hoc?
It was very much, that was what we, when I was at the Financial Times, that's what we were trying to do, was set us as that business tool, that we can give you that context and that ability, and that's what we were trying to convince, and why it was worth paying quite a lot of money for a newspaper, where actually it's not that much money if you're looking at it as a business. And we had a very good example at the FT as well. Deloitte changed their CEO. The new CEO that came in, the FT had done a negative article about him, hated the FT and got rid of us straight away. And they were our biggest account at the time.
God, that's painful. Yeah, and there's nothing you could have done about it. No.
Didn't like us.
So we do some social listening. Google Alerts is good for it. On company
Yeah.
names, it'll tell you anything new with that keyword in it. But there are other tools out there that are good for social listening in terms of positives, like they've just got a grant, or acquisitions that are going on. But like in our world, for example, sometimes strategic alliances impact. We're quite AWS focused, and sometimes a parent company might sign up with Azure for 10 years, for example.
Yes.
And then that has an impact, obviously, because there's a strategic relationship being made there. And we're seeing that with AI now, especially in the financial sector, where they're locking down on all in on one, so that they've got a bit more control. So like there's one that we work with, for example, that will not allow any member of staff in any office globally to use anything other than Copilot for AI, because they've locked in with Microsoft.
Yeah.
So there's bits of that are outside your control, but there are in the public domain that you...
Yeah. That's really good, the use of social listening. And I think there are tools to help us with that. And it's just whether it's, because I think sales has had this for years for prospecting, but I think it's been underutilized post-sales, because we think and in a sense we know our customers deeply, but by knowing deep we sometimes lose the altitude with it if we don't have some sort of motion in place. And again, I would say that's the profile. It's great to have the information. The big piece is also, do we have the team members who know how to interpret that information and what action to take off the back of it?
Yeah. You've got to be really careful not to make assumptions on one bit of information.
Exactly.
I think it also depends as well, because I think it depends who your stakeholder is, because you can try and be very strategic with someone, but if you're at someone who's too junior, then they're not going to care enough to find, so you can be strategic with them.
That's a really common thing as well, where often we're pushed down, or where our day-to-day contact is quite junior. So ultimately, and this is particularly when we work with businesses, right, our contact is not the budget holder, and so we don't often have the full line of sight into how the decisions are being made. And sometimes it's like the legacy of the relationship has meant that we've ended up in that place. And it's really hard to then build your way back up to a 1 or 2 or 3 levels above. And that's, again, it requires a certain profile of customer success. You have to earn your place in front of a senior exec. And it's, once you have it, it's good, but the kind of conversations you're going to be having with an executive buyer are very different to the ones that you have with your day-to-day kind of champion or key contact. So knowing how to communicate, I think, is another component. And I would say the other thing is how we work with sales when we hand over, because they will probably have had a more senior relationship to sell the thing. And if there's a handover bit where it sets the expectation that the executive buyer will be involved at least once or twice a year in the progress because they have skin in the game. If you set that expectation at the point where they're buying, because that's when everyone's attention is on the thing, it can actually really improve longer term where you sit. So how do you work with your commercial teams essentially to make sure that for any new one coming in, there is that handover at the right level, and that as a post-sales team, we're actually involved much earlier, not just like by the time they sign it off, you pump your handover notes and then you start from there, but essentially almost before they signed, if there's a vision of service that you're already introduced, because that already creates a relationship higher up. So I guess the challenge is also the existing customer base, where we are today with our key people and how we work that up, versus how we can improve that for new customers coming in so that it's just easier to manage moving forward. We set the expectations at the right level. Next, and this one is particularly important if you're serving large corporate clients, because the amount of stakeholders that you will have is huge. So whether it's you're going to have 7 to 9 people who have influence over the relationship, and sometimes you just have 1 or 2 key people that you're talking to. And so you've got the champion versus your end users versus decision makers above, and how you manage that entire ecosystem of people, and also how you align your colleagues in different teams when they show up in front of your customers to make sure that they know exactly what's the outcome that we want from that. How do we tailor our conversation? How do we make sure that we're all on the same page when we're speaking about something so that we show up professionally? One of the biggest things I've